Kiachitu Chinpunatomi. You're watching Stories from the Salish Sea. Ichwal Siam Sitsot Siam. In the highest of your honor, thank you for joining us. You're at Shaw, the Stories from the Salish Sea. And you will not be the same this evening with our special guests. It will be a travel around the conscious of art, culture, and politics, our theme for the Stories of Salish Sea. Our special guest for first this evening is from the Salish First Nation, Chastity Davis, from MACAW. We'd like to thank you for joining us this evening and ask for our listeners a little bit about Chastity Davis before we get into MACAW, please.
Sure.
Where does Chastity come from?
Sure. I'm a member of the Musqueam Nation, which is, you're exactly right, from the West Coast Salish Nation. And I have been in Vancouver for 14 years. I don't know how much you want me to say about who I am, but a member of the Musqueam Nation, lived in Vancouver for 14 years. I moved here to go to college and university. So left my home community to move to the big city to further my education and my career. So I came here and went to BCIT and took the marketing and sales program and completed an undergrad in professional communications, and I'm currently completing a master's degree in international and intercultural communications. And I run my own consulting business called Chastity Davis Consulting. And so I work with companies and communities and helping build bridges between Aboriginal communities and non-Aboriginal companies and people. So I am essentially a bridge builder and helping companies understand who we are as Indigenous people and our Indigenous ways of being and Indigenous knowledge. And then I help communities work in economic development with companies as well.
And your career development brought you to the MACAW. We thought it was a bird at first, and in essence, it's a historic one. MACAW acronyms, please.
Yes, so the MACAW stands for the Ministers' Advisory Council on Aboriginal Women.
And where did that come from?
So the MACAW, the Ministers' Advisory Council on Aboriginal Women, was created in 2011 with the minister at the time. So Minister Polak was the Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation. And she wanted to have an advisory council made up of Aboriginal women. So she created MACAW in partnership with Wendy Grant John. And they built out a council of 10 Aboriginal women to advise government on Aboriginal women issues at the policy and program funding level. So since then, we've been around for 4 years, and we have Aboriginal women representative all over the province, regionally, who come together. We come together 4 times a year to meet with different government representatives and work closely with the Minister of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation on advising around policy and program funding. So we'll work with the Ministry of Justice, the Provincial Office of Domestic Violence, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Transportation, and so anything that affects the lives of Aboriginal women in this province. So we look at, so what's core to us is ending violence against Aboriginal women in the province. And so we look at that in a holistic way. And so it's not just, looking at domestic violence or looking at the missing and murdered Indigenous women. So we look at violence holistically from an Indigenous perspective. And so what does that mean and what does that look like? And so we're advising government on how to look at violence holistically from Ministry of Children and Family Development and just advising around that.
If you're talking about a healing process, what kind of what does MACAW offer the public in general for a healing process?
Well, I think what our role is there's lots of work being done in this province, and has been done by lots of Aboriginal women and advocacy groups for a number of years on this issue. So violence against Aboriginal women, unfortunately, has been going on since contact. And so there's been a lot of really great work that's being done by the advocacy groups around the province already. And so what we offer is a voice to government and an advisement to government on behalf of Aboriginal women and organizations. So we really our intention is to partner and work with the work that's already being done with the advocacy groups, and then being able to collect that information and advise the government on how to have better policy, better programs, housing issues, poverty, things that are facing our women. We're talking to the government about that, and how can they enhance their programming funding to address these things that are symptoms and the root causes of violence in our community. So we're one voice in a huge movement, and so that's kind of where our strength is being able to advise government on what direction they should be going.
A groundbreaking effort also was legendary board of directors covering the geography, the whole geography of the province.
Yeah.
In all the fields that you mentioned. If there's a place where the government hasn't been in 150 years in a young Vancouver city, is on the immediate issue of the murdered women. Could you let our listeners know, MACAW has broken that ground and enhanced the government's ability to speak with the public and the people. Would you enlighten our listeners with that, please?
Sure. So if there's an issue like the missing and murdered Indigenous women, government representatives will typically come to the council and ask how to address this, and so we will give them advice from where we sit and our expertise. So the 10 women around the table, but we also encourage government to talk to the advocacy group. So the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Coalition, the First Nation Leadership Council, the chiefs in the communities, the women that are working at the friendship centers and the Carrier-Sakani Family Services. So when they come to us with an issue, we say, here's from where we sit, and you also have to do consultation with a whole bunch of other groups that are being affected by this issue. And so that's kind of where we add value, is making sure that they're consulting as well. And so we also work with the Ministry of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation on that issue, and there is an upcoming family gathering in the spring for the missing and murdered Indigenous women families, and that's being hosted by the province, and being planned in partnership with the First Nation Leadership Council, the Métis Nation of BC, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Coalition, and the family members as well. So that will be coming out, and hopefully that's a step in reconciliation and moving forward and healing together and finding solutions on the ground to find our women and to end this violence and to end what's happening in our communities.
Thank you very much for honoring our listeners. And you've been with Chastity Davis at Stories from the Salish Sea. I told you you wouldn't be the same. Don't touch that dial. Thank you for joining us with the stories from the Salish Seas. You're at Shaw, and in the highest of the honors, we're delighted to speak with healing community therapy in the field of national veterans with Executive Director Inga Kruse. First off, Inga was honored by the Vancouver Community 2014 in light of the dedication and hard work that she's done on behalf of the public. But first off, we'd like to thank you for the honor of joining us.
Thank you.
For the Salish Seas, Inga Kruse.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
First, could we let the listeners know a little bit who's Inga Kruse? Where does she come from?
I am the Executive Director of the Legion for BC and Yukon, and I have been had quite a long career in the private sector, and I worked in the insurance industry. Came from Montreal originally, Toronto, Ottawa, and then I met a Navy boy, so I got married in BC, and we have 2 kids, and we've been married quite some time. And I have always wanted to make the move to the not-for-profit sector out of private sector. So when this Legion opportunity came along, that's how I got here, and I have been here 5 years with the Legion.
I used to be scared of the Legion. My whole age, I'm over half a century. I'm part fossil now. And my whole age, I was afraid of the Legion because I thought only military, only uniforms, like only war people were allowed in there. And now I understand a lot differently being involved with the Aboriginal Veterans Day, and that was my first introduction to the Legion. And I started understanding a healing process after my first introduction to the Legion, and gradually got over my fear of. Would you have enlightened the listeners of the public involvement with the Legion and the veterans' healings?
Well, I'm glad you're not afraid of the Legion anymore because we're pretty nice people. I think that a lot of people have always thought that you had to be in the military, and that's no longer the case. Anybody that's a Canadian citizen over the age of 18 can join a Legion, and they're welcome to. You know, we love new members, we love new fresh blood, and a lot of misunderstanding is in the public because we have these clubs, and sometimes, you know, due to old liquor laws, we had no windows on the front-facing street, and it's just some old cultural artifacts that have stayed with the organization. But to really explain what the Legion's about is our lounge of operations were created basically in 1926, and it was a result of veterans coming home from the First World War, and they needed a place to talk out what they then called shell shock, and to talk with other people who understood their experience. So really the Legion has been about healing since 1926, and a lot of those branches have disappeared along the way. World War II veterans came along, and you know, they had their own stories to tell to each other. And society has changed in some ways. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily choose that place to commune with their military compatriots or whatever have you. But we are still all about healing and taking care of the more modern veterans that are coming back from theater of war in Afghanistan and other places where physical injuries happen, where emotional, they call it invisible injuries, happen, and those folks they come home into our care if we can contact them.
How is the process when they come from the front lines and the families is seeking support for the shell shock now?
So now we know that it's PTSD or some form of trauma. So the way our service works is we have funded for a very long time, I think close to 15 years, we have funded trauma counseling in a very special clinical setting that is a peer-to-peer counseling model that's facilitated by an expert clinician. Mm-hmm. So if you have, let's say, 5 or 6 veterans in a room, and they're usually divided by gender. I think it's easier. So I'm going to say for the purposes of a session that I was at in order to see how it's done, they were all men. So we had a 10-day session, and they are moved through their trauma by a very, very particular process. It takes a clinician about 2 years to learn how to do it. And then they call it dropping their baggage. They're releasing their baggage, and they are walking away with more tools to deal with the trauma that they've brought home.
Wow. And after World War II, the Aboriginal veterans in the Dakotas created a healing process that's internationally renowned, with the Indigenous world now stepping onto the outside world with a healing promotion. And the Lakota grandmothers after World War II didn't have support groups like now, didn't have diagnoses for illnesses like even just shell shock.
Oh, yeah.
So the process was the Lakotas made the sacred 4 directions colors in a star blanket, and he fasted for 10 days and sundanced for 4 days, fasting, no water, no food, and their vision quest for their own healing process. And the Crees and Lakotas brought those ceremonies international, and we're honored that you have been honored in the Vancouver West Coast community. These blankets are the poppies version from the Lakota families, and there's candles at the tips and prayers for peace for the veterans to continue with the creation's blessings that is offered at birth to hopefully live in a peaceful manner. So we appreciate the knowledge that you could share with us. In closing, if there's inspirational note that you could offer our youth or cadets or elders. A lot of elders are in our 12-year-old minds still.
That's right. That's right. Well, first I'd like to thank you and the community for, this is my personal blanket that I brought tonight, and I'm so grateful for it, and it gives me a lot of peace to have it in my home. As for inspirational, you know, we're in remembrance period, and we would hope the public would attend remembrance ceremonies in their communities, support the Poppy by donating as much as possible, because those programs are not to fund legions. The programs that we use at Poppy funds for are just for delivering services to veterans who are traumatized, and a lot of them are really young, and they're just starting their lives, and we need to help them.
Greatly appreciate. How do you contact Inga Kruse or the Royal Canadian Legion for the public?
legionbcuyukon.ca is our website, or if you want to donate to the Poppy Fund, you can text the word Poppy, P-O-P-P-Y, on your cell phone to 20222, and it puts $5 into our Poppy campaign for fundraising, and it comes off your cell phone bill.
And it's not the money, it's unity and healing and brothers and sisters helping one another. So we thank you for the honor of your time, and we hope to hear from you again on Stories from the Salish Sea and cover a little bit more ground of how the public can participate on a more community level. And thank you for staying with us for Stories from the Salish Sea. We're honored to have you join us, and we anticipate having more of your healing process for the community.
Thank you.
Wahooks in squallowin. Wahooks in squallowin. Whalmuch Musqueam. Oh,
Echual siam sitsotsiam hoichakachin quimbentomi kiachitin. In the highest of your honor, we thank you for joining us for the stories from the Salish Sea. You're at Shaw in Vancouver. We're honored to have our special guest from Musqueam in unceded territories, Shane Pointe. First, we'd like to thank you for joining us for our listeners today.
Oh, it's an honor. Honor to be here. Honor to speak with you today.
For the listeners that may not know,
Yes?
could you talk about the song you just sang and the language?
The song, what I'm doing is I'm asking all of you to open your hearts in the language Wahooks. Wahooks means to open. Squallowing, heart and the mind. So I'm asking everyone to open their hearts, open their minds, and I'm saying to them, you are proud human beings, open your hearts.
Oh, what an honor. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes, yes.
So for our listeners, let's share a little bit about who is Shane Pointe. Where do you come from before we get into your recent endeavors, please?
Who is Shane Pointe? Shane Pointe was born and raised in Nanaimo, British Columbia, which is my grandmother's village. My grandmother, Matilda, that's her village. So my grandfather, Leonard Pointe, married her, and he actually moved to Nanaimo from Musqueam. So Musqueam is my grandfather's village. So that's where I live now, is in my grandfather's village. Born and raised in my grandmother's, live now in my grandfather's village, Musqueam. Musqueam, 3,000 years old. That's how long our ancestors have been there. Just upriver, Tsustsnam, 7,000 years. Nanaimo, which is really Snuneymuxw, 5,000 years old. So that's where I come from.
You've been also involved in the healing process in the institutes, as well as now currently in the education system. In a few moments, how could you express with the public in Vancouver area to involve Musqueam with their field of education that you're involved with now in a minute?
Oh boy. Parents, I encourage you, all parents, especially Aboriginal parents, get involved with the school your child's in. Right now, I've been honored. I was invited. There's no invited. I'll just say invited. So the Vancouver School Board trustees, through their staff, invited me for this school year to be their knowledge keeper, elder and residence. So in that, what I'm doing when I go out to the schools, but when I have an opportunity like today to say to you, parents, please, Aboriginal parents, I think there's 60 different language groups in Vancouver, our relatives from right across Canada. So there's 60. I'm here I want to invite them and inspire them to get involved with the schools their children are in. Nothing more important than you being involved.
In closing, I'll invite you to offer a momentum of healing to the youth, and some of the youth, keeping in mind, are in our 90s and 80s and 70s.
What I'd like to say, although it may not seem that way sometimes, children are the most precious. Most precious. We've had a rough time because of colonialism. This time of the year coming up, the season, the winter, I want to remind everybody that historically, winter was a time for us of celebration as well. But not only celebration, it was a time to heal from all of the hard work over an 8-month time frame. So you're out there, you're harvesting herring, salmon, seals, whales, elk, deer, you're harvesting everything, plus the plants, the berries, and the medicines. So that's hard work. Our ancestors, strong, physically strong people. But what they needed to do was rest and take care of themselves as well. So I want to remind everybody that over the winter, it's a really good time to take care of oneself. If you participate, go to sweats. There are many people within the community that you can ask to come and help you brush off the negative energy. So I encourage everybody, self-care.
There, supporting the children. A great essence. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yes. You're welcome. Thank you.
And in the highest of your honor, we thank you for joining us for this healing momentum and wish you the best of the best that you deserve, because it's you that makes it a better place in Vancouver. Thank you for joining Stories from the Salish Sea. Told you you wouldn't be the same. Don't touch that dial.